What's up, everybody? This is Josh Lyles. I'm the founder over at Sales-CRM. Today, we're bringing on Matt Dahl. Matt is somebody that you'll frequently find on LinkedIn. He's one of the most consistent content creators on there in the freight space. Kind of talks about everything, just sort of from the lifestyle of being a freight broker, freight agent, from his experience in it. He's been on the recruiting side and whatnot. Has kind of an interesting and unique story and being temporarily out of the game, which we may touch on a little bit. But in general, I just want to kind of have a conversation with you, Matt. You got a pretty decent sized following. Came across you on LinkedIn. I was on your podcast with Alex, and I like a lot of the content that you post because it's just around sales. And in general, one thing that sticks out to me is just positive attitude, good energy. So it's always good to be connected with those people, and grateful that we've been able to build a friendship over these past number of months. But diving into it super quick, I wanted to talk one about. I mean, you and I have never talked about this, but you being a chess player. So I know that you played, or you were a chess player competitively in tournaments, ranked, and it's a mental and strategic game. And I've gotten really into golf, and it's so mental. And that's kind of part of the reason why I wanted to get into the game. But I'm curious what you have taken from your chess days that you applied as a freight agent.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's always good to talk. And I always love your content, as you know, and became friends over the last, I don't know, 6 to 9 months. I don't know how long it's been. Time flies. So yeah, I'm excited to be on. Yeah, chess. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is the strategy part. I mean, chess, there's so much thinking ahead and strategy. So a lot of my previous sales roles, I didn't do really any of my own prospecting. And that was probably the biggest. I like to think I'm an okay salesperson, but I would say my strongest suit as a broker was prospecting. There's just so much. That's one of my favorite topics to probably talk about. I think there's so much strategy that goes around between what companies you're targeting, the size of the companies, the areas, where you find the leads, if you're what your cadence is of follow up. I mean, there's so many different things that go in, and the strategy part of that, you know, I think is probably the most relative thing to chess. Also, the competition. I mean, people don't, I guess, maybe think of chess as a competition, but I mean, it is all tournaments. It's like people who come from, a sports background. I mean, you are competing with, you know, other people. And I mean, it kind of is similar to golf too, as you mentioned. I mean, golf, you're, competing. It's an individual sport, kind of like chess can be, but it's also, a mental game too.
Yeah, I will say I'm a amateur. Um, I don't know. I'll play chess, but definitely not at a super competitive level. But it is competitive, right? There's somebody that wins and loses, and I had actually watched the Queen's Gambit. I don't know. Did you get to catch that series
Yeah,
on
I eventually
Netflix?
did late because so many people kept messaging me, "Hey, have you watched this? Have you watched this?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." So I eventually watched it. It was, some parts of it were realistic, some weren't, but it
Hmm.
was a really good show. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, I thought it was interesting just kind of seeing some of the, I don't know, preparation, and then obviously how people approach the game, and all that goes into it. There's always levels deeper to those kinds of games. So it's always, and that one in particular, I think is interesting because it's such a mind game, and you're thinking so many steps ahead, and you're also trying to think of counter moves for what somebody else is going to be doing. So kind of find that part fascinating. But just kind of going back to how you and I got connected, which was from LinkedIn, and I know you have met a lot of friends, gotten connected with a ton of people on there. But I'm curious why you choose to be consistent with your LinkedIn content, and why do you also think that others in freight should be?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question. I don't know if I think I've told you this story, but I mean, my main intention getting on LinkedIn originally was for prospecting. I had an account from like 8 9 years ago that I hadn't done, and I kept putting in prospects' names on LinkedIn. I wanted to see how long they had been at their current company, or
Hmm.
and it would keep kicking me out saying I had to log in, so I had to go figure out my password, and then eventually got in, and I just kept seeing people you know posting about freight, and I was like, this is kind of cool, and why not try this? And so I was having so much fun myself. But the reason I think it's so valuable is just who you get to connect with. I mean, most of my friends, I've met from LinkedIn. I've came from LinkedIn, and it helps. When you have people you can bounce ideas off, people have been there. Just way to get you more visibility, and you never know when that will become helpful. I think people say it all the time on LinkedIn, and not me, but it's a great quote. Like you never know when you'll need a network, so it's
True.
better to build it before, which I think is a good quote.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I just had a former colleague of mine get laid off, and that network effect is really important, and I think that's why just posting and staying in front of people is important. But LinkedIn changed my life. I always tell people that's the reason why I've always been so proactive on it for the most part, is because I was one of the few of my friends that actually built out my profile semi thoroughly back in college. And then that's how Tesla found me, was on LinkedIn. Recruiter goes on there, searches for certain keywords, people with specific skills, experience. And luckily I got a message that they were hiring, and was able to get an interview, was able to get that job, and changed my life, for the positive. So I think it's such a powerful platform, and I know it gets a lot of hate because of some of the content that can be on there. Um, but I think that's up to you in terms of how you choose to leverage the platform, because there's a lot of positive that can go on it. So with that, I know, just from your background, and sort of diving into that you were in freight, got out of it due to non-compete situations. And I know that, some of that stuff's been lifted recently, but after freight, you got into the recruiting side, correct?
Yeah, and I still do recruiting on it's not my full time gig as of right now. That might change coming up, but I still do 1099 recruiting of freight agents, which I did do the business development side for a while. And speaking of LinkedIn, I think the 9 brokerages I worked with, 7 or 8 of them came inbound through LinkedIn. Some people I hadn't known.
Okay.
Um, I, you know, thought actually for a while I made a post about this the other day, and I don't know. We'll see how I still feel. But for a while, I was thinking of just doing it, full time and opening up my own. I went a different route for an in office job that, maybe we'll get into what that was. It had
Hmm.
some relation to, logistics, or I haven't talked about it, but plan on talking about it sometime here soon, maybe on LinkedIn. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, yeah, recruiting is still something I actively do on the agent side.
Do you have any, I guess, just from being on that side of it, talking to a lot of potential agents, I'm sure there's maybe some people that come from outside of brokerage or just outside of freight, but also probably a lot of people that are in the W-2 space looking to transition over to the agency side because of the commissions and maybe some of the freedom. Is there anything that was kind of interesting from being on the recruiting side that stuck out to you, just in regards to how agencies can be set up, or how some of these brokerages are structured?
Yeah, so I mean, unfortunately, and that's probably why it's a real passionate topic for me. But I was just talking to a kid just the other day. I mean, his dad has been an agent for his whole life. He's working at a big brokerage, getting single digit percentage and a very low salary, and he's bound by a non compete. He's not even worried about taking his customers, or he just wants to work with his dad. And he said it was a pretty sizable book of business, and instead getting something like 3-4%, for a massive brokerage, and just kind of seeing,
Hmm.
so I like to highlight some of the really good W-2s, because, from being on the recruiting side, I knew that some of the pay and some of the cultures were bad, but, I've heard some horror stories, and obviously I can't legally talk about everything that happened, with my situation, but I mean, I have a, invested interest in helping the good guys win, for sure. And that's kind of, one of the fun parts about recruiting.
Yeah. No, it is interesting with that too, because I mean, I think I obviously haven't been on the recruiting side in freight. I've only hired salespeople from being a head of sales, head of operations in brokerage before, but um, it definitely seems with some of the horror stories like you're mentioning, a lot of them are related to comp plans and the consistent changes to comp plans. You read this in some of the big investor reports, you see some of it online. I just, at least on the CRM side, with all the brokerages agencies that we work with, a lot of the companies that I work with, these guys that started these companies came from a lot of the top 15, top 20 brokerages, spun off and built their own. And typically in their story, comp plans, changes of comp plans, or something that get brought up, and then these guys go off and they're building a pretty sizable company. And a lot of them are just getting started. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of that pans out. One thing I'm curious about, with you being passionate about the W-2 agency conversation and being on the recruiting side, there is, when do you actually think it makes sense and is the right time for somebody to explore moving from W-2 to agency?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's important to be realistic because I see some people, and I get it from a marketing standpoint. They're like, agency is the only way to go. W-2 is dead, and these very absolute statements. And I get it. They have an invested interest. But I think it's one of the things I try to do is be realistic with people, about the risks, about, you're not having, health insurance, you're not having a salary, you're not having set hours. You have to really have the mindset, to be an entrepreneur, have a, somewhat of a book of business built up, unless you're okay, not making money, while you build a book of business. And then also, you really need to, consult with a lawyer probably if you have a non-compete, non-solicit. I think that's one of the big things too. I try to be realistic on is, some people will say, oh, well, it's irrelevant in this state, or it doesn't matter here, just go do it, you'll be fine. And, a lot of, myself included, I'm not an attorney, and every contract is written differently. Every state is differently. So I just try to be, realistic, with people about what the, expectations are, and, what the risks are, but what the rewards are too. Cause, that's what people, did to me. So.
Yeah. I'm curious about this because, to me, and it's just from the seat that I sit, from managing people, seeing how many people go the agency route. Obviously, there's a lot of people that get their authorities, it doesn't work out, they get out of the game, or they try other avenues, jump into other industries. Maybe a tough question to ask, but what percentage of the people that you actually come across would you say you feel like are an actual good fit to become an agent versus not? Because I would assume that number is lower than 50%, because I just think in general, as humans, there's a lot of humans that need accountability and somebody to help guide them. And not everybody truly has an entrepreneurial spirit, the self-discipline, the self-accountability, and those qualities and characteristics that I think would probably make a successful agent. But I'm curious what your take is on that from being on the recruiting side.
I would probably agree with that. Even speaking, personally, I think if I had started off as an agent and not in an office with a structure, um, I may have failed as an agent. It was, easier because, I had built it up and, spent a lot of time in the office, and had
Mm-hmm.
that structure. It was a definite, adjustment, which is why I think it's, if you have a sizable book of business, it's obviously easier to make that transition because you already know your customers, you already know the routine, you've been doing it for a while. Um, but I think a lot of people don't, realize, the discipline compared to being in an office, is much different. You
Sure.
kind of hit it on the head.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably, under 50%.
Yeah. I think just from being in brokerage and then understanding what I understand to be the lifestyle of the agents, yeah, that would be challenging. And, going through a W-2 probably to start off with, seems like you would be set up for more success just by learning, building some relationships and that kind of stuff. So transitioning over to sales, talking some sales, what I want, and I know you're a humble guy, but I want to hear this answer from you. What would you say is your sales superpower?
I'm kind of going to go back to another point, but I would say two different things. Prospecting, I think, set me apart, and also my ability to grow accounts. You know, I, I've talked about this on LinkedIn, but I mean, if you eventually cold call enough, cold email, no matter how good or bad you are, you're going to get accounts. But what you do from there, I mean, my two biggest accounts, neither one of them were very profitable for the first month or two. I think my fourth best account was in the negative after 40 loads. So I took some risks and proved service, and all those accounts, grew. Two of them to my largest that were very small the first month or two. So I mean, I think sales within actually onboarding an account, is so key. That's just my opinion as a cradle to grave rep, because I see so many people, they get in with an account and then they something goes wrong, or they don't really ever grow it. And yeah, I think especially in this market, I mean that's the key skill set to have.
It's a good point. Yeah, because I won't bring too much CRM into this, but there's a very common thing where people ask me about CRM and pipeline management when it comes to actually like structuring your pipeline and whatnot. And they'll be like, well, freight sales is different. Like you're just onboarding customers, getting onboarded with them. And yes, I would like always say that's true, but that's always also like once you get onboarded, move your first shipment, that's where everything just starts. Like it requires patience. It takes time to build the trust and actually be able to display your service. And most shippers are not just going to hand you the majority of their freight, at least from my experience from the start. And then there's other locations and all that kind of stuff. So there's, I think, an agreement there is that there's more work in the account management piece and the continuous follow up and growing accounts more than anything else. Where just with people that reach out to you and ask you about sales and tips and all that kind of stuff, what's one of the things that you often find where people just kind of have the wrong mindset of when you're having conversations with them, or if you're messaging back and forth with them? Like, where's one area that you see people going wrong? And it may be the prospecting, but I'm
Well,
curious.
I'll hit on one because I think you'll like this because it's in your CRM area. But one is, if you have 500 prospects in your name and you're just randomly, you can't physically keep up with all of that, and you're all
Mm-hmm.
over the place. There's not a good cadence. I mean, you're gonna have, and I've seen this play out. You're gonna have a real hard time getting customers. That's when people message me, I'm having trouble getting customers. I ask generally, how persistent are you being? Not annoying, but like professionally persistent with the ones you have, and how many prospects do you have in your name? And when I was on W-2, I had about half of the allotted amount, and there was a lot of people in different sales roles I've seen. Whatever the company's limit is, they want to be right at that and try to push it. Another thing too would be size of the company. I mean, I think part of the reason I did fairly well is I didn't go after billion-dollar companies or industries I didn't understand. That's why I never really was big into flatbed, because I don't really know a whole lot about construction, and geometry wasn't a specialty of mine. Like
Got to know those
food and like,
dimensions.
yeah, I don't really like. I had one nightmare with an OD load, I'll tell you sometime. And I tried and I was like, never again. But like food is tangible. I understand it. There was, I shouldn't say concrete, I guess is a construction, but it's, in bags, it's a lot more than like, easier to understand than like, moving around objects and, figuring out diameters and if this is OD or not. So,
Right.
and I would just say, how many prospects in your name, how tailored down to it, and how persistent you're being. Those would be the three things I think um, are where a lot of sales reps, in my opinion, falter.
Cool. And then I want to ask some tactical questions just kind of on that. But, all right, let's just say you got 100, 150 accounts in your name that you're prospecting. How many times within those accounts are you reaching out to multiple different contacts and people at those companies, different locations and all that? Or would you only typically be going after one person?
Yeah, so it depends on the company. There was some companies where I'd go after multiple salespeople, their logistics manager, the director and sales rep can sometimes get you in because they understand the hustle, and they have some input because
Mm-hmm.
their sales are dependent on logistics. So I think it really depends on the type of the company, but there are situations where it's just going to be one person. You hear from multiple people, and that's who you go off of. But I think more often than not, I mean, you especially learning about. I mean, once this is hard if you're just starting, but I made a lot of friends with warehouse workers and cold storages, and they gave me some very free leads, like, hey, this company is shipping out of this facility to these lanes. This is when they're doing it. This is who they're currently using, or just introductions. So once you get a customer or two, I mean, I think that's one of the best ways to grow is making friends with some of the people at the warehouse, cold storages, things of that nature.
Yeah, talk to those that are loading and unloading the freight. They know where it's going and coming
Yeah.
from. So that's a pretty good source. Did you leave voicemails?
So that's a tough one. I did sometimes, but it my past sales but I kind of very quickly did not leave many voicemails. Um,
What was your thought process on that?
just thought process on that was, first of all, a lot of these companies are getting 20 to 30 calls.
Mm-hmm.
I would generally send an email, and a lot of my shipper friends are gonna hate this, so I hope they're not watching this, because we have them on our podcast, and I know they all say do not call the cell phone, but like a lot of for me, a lot of it was contact rate. So email and cell phone. I did very little talking to gatekeepers. I would
Mm-hmm.
either call a salesperson directly, or someone else in the department, just because I felt like gatekeepers are getting 20 to 30 calls a day. They were trained to say certain things, and obviously, the more people you talk to, the more people you connect with, the better chance you have of closing. And voicemails, I didn't really get many returns from voicemails, so I kind of got rid of it quick. But I mean, people would answer their cell phone. Yes, there would be, like a lot of my shipper friends, some people are not happy with those phone calls, but
Right.
I did get customers that way, especially because a lot of companies have they're not having their personal cell on Zoom info, they're having a business cell. um, but yeah, I understand if you have success with voicemails though, and it's working for you. I don't have any. Do whatever works
No,
is my
just
opinion.
curious. I think voicemails are always an interesting I'm not partial one way towards the other. If you should or if you shouldn't, because I can understand. I think I can understand both ways. I think it sometimes may depend on how many times you've actually reached out to somebody, and if you've actually gotten a hold of them. But I know it's just a conversation that gets brought up every now and then. Can work for some people, and for some people, it's something to totally avoid. How
I got a
important?
good I got a good
Yeah.
thing on that real quick. Just on the other side, I have a friend. I shouldn't say friend. Someone I know who left a voicemail for a big shipper for 2 years straight every day. Never called him back. One day he got a call, got set up. That's a massive, massive account. The guy was listening to his voicemail every day for 2 years. Now that guy was crazy with his
It takes a long
very one
time.
of the
Yeah.
most disorganized person I've ever met. Did not have anything special to do with sales, but he was extremely persistent. He's a six-figure in profit, rep. But he has a lot, very weak in a lot of areas, but his persistency, got him to be successful. And one of that was voicemail. So I just thought that was a cool story. The other
That's a
side of
very
it.
cool story. Yeah. I mean, because I feel like the majority of people will not reach out except, maybe two or three times. I mean, there's no specific data around that. I've seen stats around, I think it's like 55% of salespeople don't follow up more than once. And I think follow ups and persistence are really just the two simple fundamentals that you can't miss, especially in freight with how many times that shippers are getting reached out to, calls, emails, social, everything. Um, there's a big part in the familiarity piece. And so if you're giving yourself three or less chances, that's just going to be really tough.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I think it's with email too. This didn't turn out to be a very good customer at all, so it's not as fun of a story. But I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
had somebody I sent I think 16 or 17 emails over a several month process, and they never answered one until the last one. And all of a sudden, they gave me a couple lanes to quote, and I got set up within 2 days. So they were obviously reading all of those, just not responding. And this could just be a theory of mine, but I think some shipping managers are used to, brokerages turning over reps every month or having a new
Right.
rep, or is that person going to be there? So if they say, hey, I've seen this name now, over 6 months, an email every 2 weeks, like this guy's going to just keep going. Like, let's just,
Right.
give him a chance. So yeah, I mean, I do think people give up too easily, and I think part of that is what we were talking about earlier. I mean, if you have 500 prospects in your name, I mean, it's kind of hard to, you know, be persistent.
That's a good point on the single point of contact, the turnover, because I do know that can be a pain point for the shipping managers, and obviously that's a good test to actually know, okay, hey, is this person going to be there or not? But I also think it's a really good display to a shipping manager. I know it could be come off as pestering or whatnot, but I do think that when somebody's showing that they want that business, and that they're committed to reaching out almost every day or every week, that that's not a random reach out. They're very dedicated because they know that there's something there. So I do give props to those salespeople that kind of just dig their feet in and get after that. Another topic I wanted to talk about, just from something that I get asked about every now and then from some customers or just people I talk to, is the debate that can go on about high volume, low personalization, or doing less outreach and high, focus more on personalization. I feel that since the time that I first got in the brokerage, when I first got in the brokerage, it was more so you would hear people just talk about you got to make 100 to 150 dials a day. And I think as each year goes on, you kind of hear that number get a little bit lower because people do seem to be focusing more on personalization. But what was your approach around quality versus quantity?
Yeah, so that's a really good topic. So like coming into logistics, I mean, I got my start, doing cold call, one call closes, like where you had to dial a lot to get somebody there. And then even in consultative sales, like, doing publishing, which I've been doing for about 3 years, selling to authors, we had 3 hours of talk time or 100 calls, like, strict KPIs. So like, and I kind of got into brokerage, and I was seeing what some of the successful people were doing, and what was working, what wasn't, and it was very, to me, I think I doubt I ever averaged over 40 calls, maybe tops 50 at the beginning. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you brought this up because I missed this when you asked for what advice would you give people, or what are some of the different areas of struggle. I mean, I think this is a massive one. I mean, if you do 5 minutes, like for example, I had a customer that did the Kirkland brand at Costco. So I just go on Costco's website, see who else shipped into Costco, and I put on the email, hey, I know you're going to Costco, or you going to XYZ, or if, for example, I shipped with one of their competitors, or I knew their lane from a warehouse, put something in the email that shows that I know a little bit about their business, which is also, going back to my point of why I didn't really do much with flatbed and, machines and things, because I would sound like an absolute idiot if I got somebody on the phone. um, so which is why I think it's important to have a niche too. But yeah, I'm a big proponent, of personalization. And I think the numbers, I don't know how some of your customers, the numbers look like for their top sales reps. But I can tell you, the people making the most dials were not the people making the most money, from what I've seen.
Yeah. I feel like talk time was always one of those good indicators too, just in regards to how good somebody actually was in sales, or how good, or maybe how bad they were. Because if you had lower talk time, typically, just being a sales manager, somebody that oversaw sales reps, most of the time that was somebody that wasn't asking good discovery questions. They weren't asking anything about the shipper. They were more focused on trying to just talk about themselves and their services, their company. And they would be the ones that were just doing most of the talking rather than the prospect doing most of the talking. Right. And at the end of the day, you got to get them to open up, to ask the right questions, understand what their potential challenges are, and that kind of stuff. So I think talk time's a pretty good indicator of that in regards to the skill that somebody has, or just their approach when it comes to sales. So um, talking about follow up super quick, I won't have too many more questions, at least for this one. But did you have a general rule of thumb for your follow-ups in regards to how many you wanted to make, your cadence in regards to how many days apart? Did you have anything in particular that you typically followed?
So this was definitely a weakness of mine. I made a post just this week about like one of the worst emails I ever sent. Because like I came from doing cold calling, which was either calling them on that, closing them on that call, or getting a credit card number, or you're not. And then my consultative sales, with authors, following up with authors is a little bit different than following up with logistics managers. And I had to experiment a lot. I did a lot of dumb stuff. Like I think I posted, I would put emails, hey, I just wanted to double tap this, which is what somebody told me to do as sales manager when we were talking to authors, and nobody ever got mad at me. But I had a shipping manager say I would never work with somebody who said this, and I didn't really know like very well how to follow up, which is why like I'm a big proponent that you just gotta do it and learn, because I was not a very there's way better sales reps at following up than I was, but
Mm-hmm.
I think because I had a niche, because I had a short prospect list, and because I did it, I didn't just give up on somebody two or three in. I experimented a lot, and I wasn't necessarily the greatest at it, but I think it worked out just because I did it. You're better off just doing it, even if you're not doing it right, than just bouncing all over the place. So, and it would depend a lot too, I should say, on like where I left off at the prospect, or how um, how important that one was, or when they were looking. Like somebody says, hey, I'm going to include you on something in 2 months, call me back, you know this. I'm not going to call them every day for the next 2 months. That would just annoy them. So I mean,
Correct.
there's so many factors.
I agreed because I get a lot of people from a systems aspect that ask about cadences, or like building follow up sequences. And I feel like for anybody that's actually been in the seat, and especially just with B2B sales in general, is that you just really can't follow a cadence consistently. And on top of that, with freight, and this may also depend more if you're a split model or cradle to grave, but especially for a cradle to grave rep, like there's definitely going to be days where you're just more ops heavy, ops focused, and not able to dip into as much prospecting. You're going to have a bunch of overdue tasks, and you get out of those cadences super fast, right? Because like the system would have to fully update, and you're not maybe able to actually get to all those. And so I feel like just with the nature of a freight in general, it makes it really tough. But it's always something I'm interested to sort of see what people's takes on of it, because to me it's a feel aspect, right? Based on your conversations with them, their tone, their energy, their responsiveness towards you. Are they short? Are they a little bit open? Did they tell you 2 months from now? Because obviously that's a pretty clear time to set out, but also maybe you do like a touch point a month from now, just to kind of stay in the mix and make sure that they don't totally forget about you, because there's a reality of that. So I don't know, it's challenging, right? And there's so many different approaches to it, but at the end of the day, it still boils down to you got to do the follow up at some point, and you do have to stay in front. And you still have to stay persistent, and being professional about it. So
How does it work for your clients that are cradle to grave? Because I was just thinking about this, from a CRM, perspective. But that's another reason why cadences are so hard. I mean, if you're a busy, as I got busier as a cradle to grave rep, I mean, I had some days where I was just overwhelmed with problems, and I have 5 overdue sales
mhm.
tasks that I couldn't get to. I think cradle to grave, you don't know what a day is going to look like, and you might end up with a CRM that has a lot of you know you can't really do a consistent cadence even if you wanted
Yeah.
to. So I don't know if you hear about that on the CRM side as well. But
Yeah, it's always an early conversation, just to really understand what their world looks like when it comes to prospecting. Are they able to do it every single day? Obviously, there's probably some days where they're going to miss it. To me, it's on the system to help them stay organized with their missed follow-ups, and that's just in an overdue bucket. And then also, if they just forget to actually set a follow-up, then at that point we just have a specific bucket that those fall into of their active leads and prospects, and that those stay on their radar. So that way they don't just fully slip through the cracks, and they don't have to go through their report of X amount, but like our system just will prompt them to try to have an action plan for follow-ups in place with every single one until they're fully organized. So you get a bunch that are in front of you. You'll see at least a list of 10, just kind of in a bunch of different separate buckets to help you stay organized. but I think it's really common. Like I think everybody in freight has those days where they're not able to get to prospecting because it's transportation, stuff happens, and that's the reason why you got to have a system in place to try to get picked back up to where you left off. And there's going to be times where you have to play from behind, and there's going to be times where you actually get to play ahead. If you're just super slow, market slow, shippers aren't moving anything and all that kind of stuff, you're going to be able to get more prospecting numbers out, or you just hang out on social media, play ping pong, and don't take advantage of that downtime.
100%.
So last question I got for you, at least for this, and if you have any questions, we can talk about anything else if you had any topics that weren't top of mind for you. But um, whether you decide if and when getting back into freight, I'm just curious if there's anything from with how many people you've been able to engage with even building the content, because I think when you do that, there's an organic way that you're also sort of teaching, you're building self-awareness because you're understanding things that worked for you, things that didn't. You're talking to a ton of people in the space. You've been on the recruiting side now and whatnot, just a bunch of different areas. But from the process of being out of it, and if and when you were to get back into it, is there anything that sticks out to you where you're like, this is what I'm going to change in my game?
So I think it's a matter of, I'll answer the question for you, a matter of when, not if.
I was trying to be light on that the positioning of that question.
But that's a good question. I would say one thing that's interesting me more is the asset side of things. Obviously, I worked and built my book on a non asset side of things. Another thing was the videos. I didn't really do any videos. I've seen a lot of people talking about video outreach. And I'm a little more open minded. I think I was a little bit closed minded about being 100% cradle to grave, and I still think cradle to grave would be more fun for me. But I definitely wouldn't eliminate of just doing sales down the line, because I think there's a lot different types of customers you can go after. And I've learned a lot about. I never did a bid I was 100% spot. I
Spot.
shouldn't say that. I did one bid that was a 3 lane thing, but I never had
Ooh.
any like, you're gonna do Houston to Chicago these 3 days of the week. I didn't have any freight like that. Mine was
Okay.
very chaotic and all spot. So I think I've learned a lot from talking to other people about bid cycles, how that works, pricing. This freight's such a big world. I mean, I kind of had my own little niche, and when I came back, I could have completely different type of customers that are a whole different skill set. So that's the fun part about talking to other people and their books of business, and how they do it. I'm sure it's fun for you on the CRM side too, because I mean you deal with people with all types of different business models,
Oh
different
yeah.
types of sales reps with different experience levels, and how they utilize your CRM can affect their results. Or I can definitely see
Mhm.
if it's not your fault, obviously, if they don't use the CRM. So I'm sure you get to see a lot of fun stuff on your side too, as we've talked about.
Yeah, it's just cool to see people's behaviors, how what their approach is, why they win, why they lose. I think there's a lot of things that you can figure out when it comes to that. But I mean, that's the fun part about sales, is that I look at it as a game, and everybody gets to choose how they want to play the game. And just like anything else, a lot of it is based on your effort and input. And so that's why it's always fun to have these conversations and to understand strategies. I can say on the video it's something I've tried, but I will admit that it's something I've never been good about being consistent about, of consistently building videos. It's sort of tough also just being a bootstrap founder because of all the other things that I do. And for me, picking up the phone is just such a fast, easy thing to do. And I feel relatively comfortable on the phones. And I think it's just the fastest way to build pipeline. But I have actually had a couple successes from video, whether that's from content, but also from actually like directly sending a Loom video, or, I know Vidyard's another popular product that's out there. If it's more personalized to a specific individual, I think that shows, I don't know. I think it can give you a higher chance of potentially getting a meeting with somebody. So
Have you tried the personal note? I never tried that, but that's an idea I want to try when I come back to, of writing a, mail, sending a letter. Like nobody really
yeah,
does it anymore, but I've seen some people have some success because it, gets to the person and they're like, I don't know how many freight brokers are actually sending, or tech providers
Hmm.
are actually sending, letters to the decision makers, which is another cool idea I want to try at some point.
Done a little bit of that, but to me, not enough volume to really understand is it something that's really effective for me or not. And I think the other part that was challenging is post COVID, just knowing if somebody's actually working in the office or if they're not.
That's a
I
good
will
point.
say one thing that semi worked over the holidays was there was a few that I just sent gifts to. They're pretty personalized, based on those individuals, and um, they are able to earn me meetings. So sometimes that can go a long way, if you know it's the right account and you know who it is and if they're going to be at the office and all that kind of stuff. So I did test that out, and I plan to do more of that once it gets to holiday season at the tail end of this year. But it's fun. I mean, that, again, it's always fun worth trying. I think that with all of this stuff, it's about what are you going to be able to do consistently and in volume to really understand how well it works or if it does not work. And like, this is just my big take, especially on the cold emailing. I think everybody's cold emailing. So anything that you can do that is not what everybody else is doing, it has a better chance of being effective, and you just got to do it in reasonable volume. But emailing is just going to be the most challenging by
What do
far.
you have for a subject line? That's something we didn't talk about. What do you put when you're emailing a brokerage? What's your subject line?
Normally it's like shipper prospecting, shipper sales. If I see that I typically will do something contextually from their website or from their social pages or that's involved around shipper sales. Like, it's always going to be revolving around that, because when they see that, like, they're not getting that from other CRM companies. They're just getting something about systems or CRMs or like boost your revenue. But I try to get really contextual just because I understand exactly what they're looking for. And I try, based on website, job postings, that kind of stuff, understand exactly what they're looking for. Because, I mean, this is underrated, but like, job postings will give you a good idea in terms of how a team operates. You see a job posting for a salesperson, I can understand what systems they use sometimes. I can understand what the responsibilities, I can get an understanding. Are they cradle to grave? Are they split model? So when I do go to do those calls, I can be a lot more, it's just a more well-researched cold call. And it
More
feels a little
prepared.
bit, yeah. And I think they can understand that and respect it. And so sometimes people will say, hey, we use XCRM or we use XTMS, or this is, the expectations, and you're focused on finding new customers and growing them, or you're also talking to customers and doing operations, so you sort of can get an idea. Um, so yeah, those are the. I think I'm really big on the research and not just making them super random outreaches.
How big of an advantage do you? We've talked about. I think we talked about this on our podcast too, or on the phone. But I mean, how big of an edge do you think you see? Because I'm talking about shipper sales, like having a niche and knowing a little bit about what you're doing. Obviously, like Costco. I prospected other businesses that did Costco's and knew how their operations. How do you think that helps you with having the knowledge of being running a brokerage and sales, having sat in
Mm-hmm.
that seat? I mean, does that help a lot of your prospects? Like, hey, this guy
Tons.
actually knows what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, man, because these people, like, people will pay a lot of money to get somebody to build a system for them, and it takes a lot of time. And my little joke, or what I always kind of say is my sort of catchphrase, is that for those that have significant others and those that have been in freight for 5, 10 plus years, there's a very good chance that their significant other still doesn't know what they do as a freight broker or as a freight agent, right? And you may live with that person or you talk to that person every single day, and they're the closest person to you, and they probably still don't have a very good understanding of what you do. Some do, I know that, but there's a lot that don't. And I think that's also why freight brokers can have such a tight knit community, because of all the stresses and the challenges and everything that goes into it. But yes, to me, it gives us a huge leg up, because people see stuff in our software and they understand things. And I, I mean, it's just the truth, because it's what they tell us. But a lot of times, what they see, what's free in our system, and when they first sign up, is already more customized, templated out than what they may have paid somebody thousands of dollars for, and that took them 3 to 9 months to build out with some other shop for a generic CRM that already cost them thousands more just for the software, but then they had to go hire somebody, go through all this onboarding and all these multiple implementation setups. And I'll give one example, but there was one that I talked to and good cordial relationship, lost the deal. This was like mid last year. Ended up meeting with them at a conference, had a really good conversation with them. And they're like, yeah, we ran into some challenges because they were trying to get us to build a deal in the pipeline for every single shipment. And so that's what this outside consulting firm was sort of guiding them on, because again, they just didn't understand that like that's the stuff that goes into a TMS. It does not go into a CRM. You're not managing shipments in a CRM. If you did that, salespeople would go absolutely insane. So, but yeah, I do think it's a big advantage. And you know, I will say in my entrepreneurial journey and for what I've had in being able to build Sales Dash, it's the biggest lesson that I've learned is just finding your niche. Like, you got to do it. You don't need to be for everybody. That it's totally okay to not be for everybody. It makes selling and marketing so much easier when you can speak to a specific individual, understand their problems, and you know, provide service and or build a product that's very focused on solving their problems.
I think a good summary of your business would be like a freight broker calling I don't know. I don't know what company to say. Some multi-billion-dollar company would be like you on the tech space, like calling TQL up and being like, "Hey, can I give you our CRM?"
Yeah,
It's like
I
you
mean
got to
they've
be
got
a
their
niche, in terms of like you probably have a certain like ideal client. Is kind of what you're saying. I'm getting at.
correct. Yeah. There's some people that, and even in brokerage, like there's some people that aren't a good fit for us as a brokerage, and I'm okay with that. Like, we're not going to be good for every single brokerage and agency. You know, like some of them, you'll call them and they're like, nope, we're just really happy with where we're at. We're just trying to retain our customers. Cool. Like, CRM is not going to be something that you look at, right? Or if you don't do prospecting or anything of that nature, yeah, it's just not a need. So there's no reason for
The
me
market
to
flips
focus on them.
is probably going to be good for you too. I'd imagine. I think I've told
For
you that a
sure.
couple times, but I'm optimistic it'll be good for the CRM world.
I think it will be too. Yeah. But it's easy for me to say, but I'm one of those people where I think, like, if I'm the business owner or the brokerage owner, planting seeds now is what matters. It's not about when the market flips. It's about trying to get in front of those relationships, you know, prior to that stuff turning. I think that part of it's really, really important. But everybody again plays the game a little bit differently. And there are some that are very open to that. They're like, hey, we're not going to do anything until it flips. To each his
No,
own.
100%. And it kind of can go both ways. I mean, give yourself an excuse, like now there's no money to invest in tech, and then the market flips. We're too focused on retaining our customers to do sales. So, I mean, I feel like there's an excuse that could be used in every market. But as you said, if you get ahead of it, makes it easier in the long run.
100%. Hopefully more to come on this. And I know that this probably won't be the last time that you and I record some content. So I thought this was some good action packed stuff. I think there's some good takeaways that people can have, you know, just in regards to, you know, being a freight agent, being a freight broker, sales, prospecting, all those kinds of different things. You got a lot of good insight, knowledge, and experience, Matt. Everybody go follow him on LinkedIn, Matt Dahl, Dahl. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it. Well, thanks for having me on. It's
Of
always,
course, Matt.
I know we talk off screen a lot, but it's always good to see you, virtually too. And yeah, look forward to meeting in person sometime in Tennessee or some conference. And yeah, it was fun. Thanks for
100%.
having me.
Likewise, man. Really appreciate you taking the time. Always good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Cheers.
Cheers.